Hi, everyone, and welcome back to The Negotiation. In this episode, we speak with Bill Tung, Managing Director at Peaks Consulting and former Vice President of International Sales and Market Expansion at Columbia Sportswear. Bill brings a unique lens to the outdoor and fitness industries in China through his background in growing apparel brands in these sectors. On tap in this discussion is the ongoing explosion of the fitness culture in China, the sporting goods market in general, the difference between the China, Japan, and Korean markets, how the 2008 Beijing Olympics impacted the industry there, what fitness retail looks like in China, and how Japan's work culture influences their shopping habits and more. Enjoy.
Going back to my first job at Cybex, I was selling fitness equipment to the Chinese Olympic Organizing Committee in Beijing. And they were procuring, world-class fitness equipment for their world-class Olympic athletes at the training center. And you can picture going to Beijing in 87 and 88, Todd. It was, there were no taxis. There was one, I think, international hotel, the Sheraton Great Wall at that time. And, talking to the officials in 1988, they said it was their dream to host the Olympics in Beijing someday. And so when you're standing in the middle of Beijing and you can't get a taxi because there are none, you're just thinking, there's just no bloody way.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market no globally minded brand should ignore, but entering markets like China is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. Times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success expanding into the markets of the Middle Kingdom. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies enter the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful China entry and growth strategies by interviewing the people behind those success stories. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation, brought to you by WPIC Marketing and Technologies. Bill, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you very much, Todd. Greetings from Boston.
If you could maybe just give us and the audience a little bit of your background and how you came to be so involved throughout the APAC region and really have a great, Western plus Asian collide that you're going to be able to speak to.
Sure. And thank you again for having me on your podcast, Todd. Well, I was born in Hong Kong, but my family immigrated to the States outside of Philadelphia. So I grew up as a Flyers fan, Todd, not as a Bruins fan. So we immigrated to the States in the late 60s in the suburbs of Philadelphia. So I had went to a public school, went to Penn State University, but always wanted to be involved in international business. So I went to a place called Thunderbird out in Arizona, focused on international business. And really, my first job out of school was for a fitness equipment manufacturer called Cybex, based out of Long Island. And the job was to be selling, flogging their fitness equipment in Asia. So they basically said, there's the travel agency, here's the catalog price list, and here's the map of the world. You've got everything west of California, so go at it. So spent a lot of time between Tokyo and Australia and India and all points in between early on in my life. And then was fortunate to move to Hong Kong, and I was in charge of sales and marketing for Prince Racket Sports at that time. So it was quite interesting in the world of tennis and badminton and squash at that time. So it was quite fun. And then I was working at the Reebok organization in Hong Kong in a regional role. I was posted to Tokyo for a few years, then over to London, and then back to Hong Kong. But I spent 13 years at Columbia Sportswear as their head of international sales, really covering all the markets outside of the United States. And then the last few years, just a brief period of time heading up the international sales at New Balance Athletics. And then more recently at Fanatics, which has the license for various sport teams and sport leagues around the world. But I spent a lot of time in Asia, certainly lived in Hong Kong, lived in Tokyo, but certainly with a lot of the companies I work with, China, Korea, and Japan were very focal points for business growth.
Okay, awesome. That's going to set us up really well to talk, to have some fun conversation, especially around the sports and athletics, and another bit of a field that I wasn't aware that you were a part of, which was the fitness. Do you still pay attention to, back to your very first early days? I don't think I could even repeat that brand name, Cybex.
Cybex, Cybex, yeah.
I actually find the fitness culture one of the fastest moving, fastest changing elements to Asia, where I just don't think they were that much deep into sport and maybe transitively into fitness. But now it is going gangbusters.
Yeah, for sure. In the late 80s, when I started working at Cybex, a fitness center in Asia were mostly just in your foreign hotels, in Hiltons and Sheratons and Hyatts. I mean, a fitness center, like a 24-hour fitness or something like that, just, for the masses and for the public, really didn't exist. It really took more of a foothold in Japan, where the young people were still, it was breaking out and getting into taking memberships of fitness clubs. In Korea, absolutely in hotels, catering to the foreign guests and to the local population as well that would sign up for them. But in China, forget about it. It was just always just in the hotels, and obviously that certainly progressed over the years to yoga studios and Pilates studios, and has developed quite a bit.
Tell us a little bit about your time with Columbia. I'm very familiar with Columbia. I'm in Canada. We Canadians, we need to stay warm. I'm pretty sure Canada is a pretty large market for Columbia. Tell us a little bit about, the mainland Chinese consumer sporting goods market in general, just, from your perspective through working with Columbia.
Yeah, interesting. Back when I joined in 2003, Columbia already had a subsidiary in Japan, already had a subsidiary in Korea. China was virgin territory. And at that time, Columbia had a distributor based in Hong Kong, the Swire Resources Group, the part of the Swire Pacific organization. And we were working with them to, explore what was going on in China. And from the outdoor apparel industry at that time, there were 3 brands selling in China, and they were all domestic OEM brands. So there was no Patagonia, there was no North Face, there was no Arc'teryx. There was no Canada Goose at that time. So we met with, we thought there was an opportunity here. We had business in Hong Kong, albeit small, of course, but we thought, it'd be good to have the first mover opportunity to move into China. So I remember clearly, certainly in early 2004, we met with about 24 sports retailers. And, these business entrepreneurs, they were running retail for Nike, Adidas, Reebok at the time. And we did the whole song and dance about the outdoor industry and about Columbia Sportswear and how there might be an opportunity in China. So it was rather devastating, actually, because after the presentation, we met with each of them one-on-one. And it was quite unanimous that all 24 of them gave us a big thumbs down, that they were just not interested. And it was very interesting. These were very sophisticated, worldly entrepreneurs. They all knew about Columbia Sportswear. They traveled around the world. But the common theme was, well, Bill, nobody's skiing in China. Nobody's snowboarding. Nobody's camping. Nobody's trail running. So all these activities about outdoors, nobody's doing in China. So do we need to keep warm and dry? Yes, absolutely. But there was just, for the actual activity itself, it was just a big goose egg. So working with the executives at Swire Resources, we said, well, hell, we'll just set up our own little shop ourselves. So if I recall correctly, it would have been sometime later in 2004, set up the smallest shop and shop. I think it was at Yaohan department store over on Pudong side of Shanghai. It was up on the sports floor. I remember visiting, you got Nike had their nice space. Adidas had their nice space. All the athletic brands had their nice space. And I think we had 3 pieces of fixturing in a dark corner with some jackets and down jackets and Gore-Tex jackets on there. And so it was a very modest way of starting a business there.
Wanted to talk about the ins and outs of really driving a brand. Were you paying attention to what some of the other guys were doing well, and maybe some of the realizations that hit you when you started on the ground in China doing what you were doing? And how did you start to go through customer acquisition or brand recognition in China? What were some of the strategies that you deployed? Were there certain sectors or demographics or even certain sports that you started to target to get some early traction there?
Yeah, for Columbia, it was very much dictated on the features, advantages, and benefits of the product to justify those price points. Because, in China, anybody could buy a down jacket, but why were they buying your products that kept you warm and dry? And so, we had our proprietary technologies. We used Gore-Tex back in those days. So it was very much in-store marketing to very much educate consumers. Why are you going to be paying 2x, 3x retail price points for buying something? So certainly it was about bringing the heritage, the authenticity about the brand, and bringing that to life, bringing that alive in store. So it was very much of an education process early on. And certainly bringing, Columbia had a heritage back to 1930s in the United States. So I think that was certainly very much appreciated as it was in Japan and Korea. That was an authentic brand, and that, just something coming out of a factory in China. So I think that those were very important things of authenticity and history. And authenticity.
Looking back, because you have deep experience not just in China but obviously Japan and Korea, can you point to anything unique about and kind of splay apart those three markets? They're not, and it's just one of the themes that we find. You have to talk to people like, no, it's not a homogenous kind of set of customers when you go to those countries. They're actually quite different, and you have to know that and realize that going in. How would you separate them, especially when it comes to maybe sports fitness or sports apparel, even through your work with Columbia? So how would you differentiate those three markets and those three customer sets?
Yeah, one size does not fit all. It's very simplistic that a lot of American companies, North American companies, well, it sells really well here at REI or at Canadian Tire. So why wouldn't it sell well in Tokyo, Seoul, and Shanghai? So that's a bit of, to be polite, ignorance, and to be polite, just a bit of laziness as well, quite frankly, to make those assumptions. So, back in the early days, it was just like you took your global collection and you put it into the stores and you see what would fly. And then you realize, oh, hey, this is way too big, or the size and fit doesn't work. And so then you need to go back and work with your product team to adjust your size and fits. And so, well, these products work well, these products don't work well. And then how are you going to modify your product and your designs to be more fitting of the local consumers? For Columbia Sportswear here in the United States and Canada, the consumers were more suburban, if not rural. Much more male than female, much more of an older consumer. And whereas in Asia, the consumers were urban and certainly younger and certainly much more fashion forward. And so were they buying the products for the same reasons, to go skiing? In the case of Japan and Korea, absolutely. Were they buying it to keep warm and dry? Absolutely. But there was certainly more of a fashion element to the brand. So fortunately at Columbia, we had the flexibility and foresight to localize design in Japan, localized design in Korea, to the point where probably 75, 80% of the styles sold in those countries were completely localized. So you can say, oh, the brand's gone off in different directions, but you still kept the DNA and the history of the brand intact. And even though the product was, it was still outdoors, it was still kept you warm and dry, it was still functional, but just had a higher degree of, I would say, style, design, fashion element behind that.
Yeah, I would imagine, not to put words in your mouth, but from my perspective, I would expect that you would lean in on more of the fashion, the style, the brand, because potentially some of the technology might, not saying that it's lost on the consumer, but it's not going to be as necessary or as important if they aren't really kind of scaling Mount Everest.
Right. You're absolutely right, Todd. The thing is that you needed that technology edge or your concept of technology just as a point of differentiation and to help, justify those price points. Because, back in the early days, pre-internet and online selling, I mean, my gosh, I mean, in China and Korea and Japan, you're almost selling this product at whatever price you could get. And I don't want to say price was no object, but early on days, yeah, you could, I wouldn't call it price gouging, but it was, you're selling product that was selling in North America for $100 retail, and you'd be selling it in China for $180, $200 retail. And obviously that didn't last very long until everybody had a smartphone. So
let's talk a little bit about a serious sporting event that may have had a lot of impact, which was the 2008 Olympics in Beijing, and how that may have brought significant awareness or appreciation or interest in fitness and sporting. And what did that do to your markets and your products and your ability to do your job in Asia at that time?
Yeah, certainly at Columbia Sportswear at that time, that was our fourth year into the marketplace. And Columbia Sportswear, unlike the Nike and Adidas, is not so much into athletic competition. It's more about the activity. And certainly this was a summer event, whereas Columbia is more of a fall-winter brand. But nevertheless, it certainly, I was in China during the time, and certainly it was just an awareness of health, fitness, moving, and just developing a healthier lifestyle. And so certainly I think that just the awareness was still in its early stages, I would say. I think it was certainly a great event for the athletic brands. Certainly, I think it was at that time, Mark Parker, the CEO of Nike, was quoted as saying, we can't invest enough in China because they saw the opportunity, they saw the writing on the wall. And certainly, I think by 2008, Nike had reached about $1 billion in revenue in China. Lord knows what they are today. But they were just ramping up. And they had started 10 years prior. So it's not like that was their entry point. They were certainly on 1988. And in the 90s, they were already laying the foundation for the brand, as was Adidas. But an interesting story. Going back to my first job at Cybex, I was selling fitness equipment to the Chinese Olympic Organizing Committee in Beijing, and they were procuring, world-class fitness equipment for their world-class Olympic athletes at the training center. And you can picture going to Beijing in 87 and 88, Todd. It was, there were no taxis. There was one, I think, international hotel, the Sheraton Great Wall at that time. And, talking to the officials in 1988, they were saying that it was there. Keep in mind, China had just started to go back to the Olympics, LA Summer Games 84. Prior to that, I mean, they weren't in Montreal in 76, and so maybe they were in Moscow in 80, but certainly they were just coming back in the Olympics. And speaking with the officials, they said it was their dream to host the Olympics in Beijing someday. And so when you're standing in the middle of Beijing and you can't get a taxi because there are none, you're just thinking, I mean, there's just no bloody way that you guys have the infrastructure to host an Olympics. And lo and behold, and then they got the Winter Olympics around the corner next year. So, or 2 years from now. So that'll be very interesting. But in terms of winter sports, that just, skiing was something so way out there, like golf. It was just not accessible for the masses. And that's something that's been developing over the last few years, as have trail running events, mountain climbing events, as have marathon events. So certainly, it's in the last 20 years, it certainly just exploded, this whole concept and idea of health and fitness, which has been fantastic. And certainly that was as rising incomes and certainly more leisure time.
And more infrastructure as well, for the things that are expensive to do, right? Which is skiing or playing hockey or some of these other activities. It's expensive infrastructure. The infrastructure's upkeep is expensive for whoever's, managing the facility. And then, of course, the sport itself, even just to get there. It's, it's not like you can run out into the school field and start playing basketball or soccer, right? I mean, there's a reason why these are like the most worldly, most popular sports, is because they're relatively easy and accessible and cheap to get in and have some fun and play.
Well, precisely. I mean, if you're growing up in China, Todd, and you want to play golf, but if mom and dad don't belong to the private golf course, you're not playing golf. It's as simple as that. So
that's a good point. That's another one on that extreme end as well, for sure.
And that's sort of like Pan-Asia, quite frankly, because the number of public golf courses are just a handful. So just that's the accessibility.
True. Absolutely. For a moment, because we're already talking about the Olympics, maybe I'll bring you into that conversation about the next Olympics coming up here soon. Just to quickly piggyback on the last conversation. What are you doing now? How are you anticipating in your world? This obviously is something that I think everybody from the background of whether you're a fan or, sports apparel and brands, this is the next, whatever mistakes people made in 2008 with their brands trying to get into China and leverage the Olympics, they're going to fix them this time, right? So can you talk a little bit about the preparations, the strategies, the excitement, what's going on in the sports and apparel world or even the fitness world looking towards the next Olympics in 2022?
Yeah, I think for a new brand that's looking to go into China, and I'm consulting with a number of brands as we speak, because, it's been about China. And so whether you're a sporting leisure brand or a luxury brand, it's all about getting online in China. So you can say, well, everybody and their mother's in China already. Well, that's not true. I mean, certainly there are a lot of brands that haven't gone into China, and yet they're desperate to break into the marketplace. And maybe they have zero brand awareness in China or very low brand awareness in China. It's all about getting on a digital platform, working with the local TP. Obviously everyone wants to get on Tmall or Jingdong, JD, but it's just because you're there, it's not going to work. I mean, the last number of years, there have been many brands that have tried and failed in China. So it's not like there's 1.4 billion people just waiting for you. So I always believe it's more of a multi-pronged attack or approach, Todd, where it's just not about being online. It's just you need to have a physical presence as well, because the consumers still need to feel and touch and experience your brand. And certainly, I think for somebody who's new going into China specifically, I think that's still very important.
What should expectations be for a brand when you tell them you do need to have a physical presence? It's not nascent, it's not dead. But here's what your expectations should be. Here's what you should do, and here's what you should expect from the physical presence side of things.
Well, I think, are you going to, the thing is that, are you going to be operating that brick and mortar stores yourself? Then you need to set up a subsidiary, or do you want to find a local partner? If you're going to find a local partner, is that somebody that's going to be a joint venture, or are you going to find a local distributor / licensee that you're going to work with? So to establish that physical presence, are you going to have flagship stores in the first tier cities, or you shop in shops just in the department stores? What does that mean for you for that physical presence? And then how do you marry that with your online presence, with your own website, having your website on the Tmall marketplace? And how do you make sure that you're managing your price points to be consistent, and your marketing as well? Because I think a lot of companies get sort of mixed up. Oh, we're gonna list with company A to take us online, but we're gonna work with company B to open up stores, and then you find out they're at each other's throats because they're undercutting each other on pricing or inconsistencies that way.
When you're starting to manage your digital, I'm assuming that e-commerce and being able to facilitate e-commerce needs to be a big part of that. What about product positioning, even physical product placement? Where should you be thinking about, or what should you be thinking about really when it comes to you're going to make a big splash, you're going to have online, you're going to have e-commerce, but where should the products be when you're going to do that?
Yeah, well, let me address, I think so many of the companies that I've been advising get so excited about Tmall's Double 11. I said, wow, holy cow, they're selling billions of dollars of product. We need to get our portion of that. Well, you need to dig into what are the brands actually selling. And early on, that Double 11 event were for brands like Nike and Columbia and whatnot to be selling their excess inventory, like an outlet. Right. And then it developed into, wow, it's got so much momentum, so many eyeballs on this, and it's developed so quickly. Then it developed into, we're going to be just selling, made for that event, sort of like made for outlet, made for Double 11, because, unless you have excess inventory, do you want to be selling your inline product at deep discounts on Double 11? And then that's causes all sorts of challenges and problems for the brands. So I think today on Double 11, you get a great deal, absolutely, but it's either an excess merchandise or it's made for the event.
I think if I was a brand too, and I was phasing out a product or a model or a line of something, I'd be like, okay, let's do that, but let's delay it a couple of months and then hit it hard on 11/11, and we might be able to, have a nice large liquidation all at the same time to be able to move on to our next product lines.
Indeed. And I think just going back to that issue of going into China with a new brand, and the concept in North America, American Canada, of wholesaling to a Canadian Tire or to an REI or a Dick's Sporting Goods doesn't exist. So if you want to sell those shoes or those jackets, you sign the lease yourself to sell them, or you find somebody to do it for you. Yes, there are all these department stores, but you're not selling to the department store. They're acting as landlords. You need to lease the space in that store for whether it's 100 square meters or 1,000 square meters, whatever the size of your space is going to be. So it's a very different concept. That whole idea of wholesaling in China and Korea is very similar. You need to manage it yourself or find a partner to do so.
On that topic, and the last topic, I want to move on to talking a little bit about Japan here as well. But staying on China, one last question. Do they have a large, big box type of store? We have Canadian Tire, which is kind of our thing in Canada. You'll have an MEC equipment co-op. Sometimes the Targets and Walmarts will have those departments. But what does that look like in China? Do they have large, big box department stores that are just sporting good department stores, or is it self-managed, operated, independent mom and pop shops?
Yeah, a good question, Todd, because that's historically it was about the mono brand store or shop and shop experience. If you wanted to buy a Columbia jacket, you had to go to a Columbia store or a Columbia shop and shop. You wanted a pair of Air Jordans, you had to find a physical Nike store. The multi-brand retail big box previously didn't exist. Now, Decathlon from France, they've got quite a number of their big box stores. They're selling mostly their own private label, whether it's swimwear or outerwear or what other product might be. The big, Dick's Sporting Goods hasn't landed in China yet. And so it would be interesting if they did. Some of the Japanese retailers have tried. The Russian, a very large Russian sports retailer called Sportmaster has a number of stores. But I think still in the mind of the consumer, they like to shop brand and have that brand experience when they're going out to retail. And that's very similar to what happened in Korea as well. Just that multi-brand retail is certainly not the majority, certainly still the minority.
So then moving on to Japan, maybe give us a bit of a baseline. Tell us a little bit, what is the Japan sports and apparel fitness market? What does that look like? Where is it growing? How fast is it growing? And then maybe even go ahead and juxtapose that against the Korean one.
Yeah, sure. I think the challenge of Japan is an aging population. And the aging population, as it is in Korea as well. It's not aging even faster, but certainly obviously very high disposable income. And, the athletic sport brands, outdoor brands have all been quite well established in Korea and Japan over the years. And certainly, I think with the Japanese consumer, I always say this, ignore the concept of Japanese uniqueness at your peril.
good advice.
So whether real or imagined, I think certainly that's to be respected and that's to be understood, because the Japanese consumers' concept of brands, their expectations on specifically quality and service, I think are really at the pinnacle. I've always said that if you can satisfy Japanese consumers' expectation about quality, then you've got the rest of the world covered.
Well said.
And it doesn't matter if you're selling a Louis Vuitton pocketbook for thousands of dollars or a cotton T-shirt at Uniqlo. There's a certain expectation of quality for those price points in between. So I know at Columbia Sportswear, we had to do certain modifications and adjustments to make sure that the quality was at a much significantly higher level, because the consumer's expectations are just high. I mean, they're spoiled for choice in Japan.
There's a quip in the tech world that says Google only loves you once everybody else does. Just a bit of a play on their algorithms, right? So there's somebody loving you once everybody else does, and then there's somebody loving you and then everybody else does. Would you put Japan in the first category or the second category?
I think the first one, perhaps. Yeah, if I understand your definitions precisely. But I mean, a lot of brands have gone to Japan and have had to make significant modifications. I mean, I think there are very few brands that are purely as is from their home market. Just from a marketing standpoint, but really just from a product modification standpoint, not just in size and fit, but like I said, design, quality. It just needs to be much more sharp. You really need to bring your A game to Japan.
So talking about that A game, and when it applies to online presence, what can you tell us, even the unique particulars about existing online in China? How do you need to look and feel? What does the experience of shopping for your brand need to look like? What does the payment options need to look like? The delivery need to look like? The packaging need to look like? What can you tell us a little bit about how to manage that online experience as a brand in China?
I think the consumer expectation is going to vary, Todd, depending on, whether you're a mass brand or a luxury brand. But having said that, you got to be on mobile, because whatever that percentage is, it's not what you and I are doing right now off of our laptops or desktops. So it's all about, mobile shopping. That I think is certainly a much higher percentage of how consumers engage with brands. I think it is very important. So, but I think certainly the expectations of delivery and packaging, certainly you're going to have to meet those, world-class expectations from the consumer. I don't think that's any different, quite frankly, than anywhere else in the world. But if you're in Lanzhou, China, out in Gansu province, then maybe you're sort of understanding that maybe it's going to take another day or two to get to you. But I think that the infrastructure in China is developed so that it's pretty awesome as it is today versus not that long ago. I
know. I'm giggling because the logistics and supply chain in China was just phenomenal. Like it was so incredible the way how fast you could get things and send things around. I mean, it was just awesome.
Yeah, these days you get the high-speed train from Shanghai to Lanzhou. It takes you, 6 hours, whereas before it would take you 5 days to cross the country. So it is quite amazing.
Yeah. I stopped flying to Beijing from Shanghai and started taking the train.
The train. Absolutely.
The train took you right downtown. You didn't have to sit in traffic for over an hour from the airport to get downtown after you even got there and went through the customs and the whole thing, right? So, yeah. And occasionally, and 5G is going to help a lot with this. You actually have internet. You could actually work on the train much more easily and actually send emails. Okay, a little bit about the work culture of Japan. They're famously known for how hard and how long they work, right? And we know that China has the 996, and Japan would probably, go take them to task on that too. How does that impact the way they shop, when they shop, what they're buying, what they're wearing, what they're using it for?
Interesting. The Japanese term is karoshi. It was just they were worked to death. Yes, they died because they were, and that happened to a number of executives, mostly in the 80s, perhaps in the 90s. I think that's changed a lot, Todd, where a lot of companies are not expecting you to put 80 hours a week into the office. So I think that's certainly been a change. I think younger executives under 35, they won't do that. They won't tolerate that, quite frankly. I think there's certainly, there was a time and place where nobody dared to leave the office until the boss did. And so if the boss was there till 10 o'clock at night, you were there till 10 o'clock at night. And so I think that the young people just are not tolerating that. They'll just up and leave and find another company to work for that has much more reasonable work hours. I know at Columbia Sportswear, when we had a subsidiary, we do have a subsidiary there, I made sure that the GM left at a reasonable time so that the other staff would feel comfortable leaving before 8 o'clock, but still very long hours. But, it's not, they worked very hard. They were there till 9 o'clock. Well, what did they do? Nothing, but they were there till 9 o'clock. So, equating long hours at the office to working hard and being efficient is certainly a misnomer. So I know the companies that I work with at New Balance and Columbia, we're having subsidiaries there. We always made sure that the employees, got the hell out at a reasonable time. Were they working longer hours than anybody else around the world? Absolutely. But, we try to make it, not past 7 o'clock, which, try doing that here in the North America, you'd have a riot on your hand.
Everybody'd go social and be posted. It's 6:30 p.m. I'm still at the office.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that's changed a lot, Todd, from, the last generation to this generation, people just having more free time and using their social time more. So
that's good. That's got to have a positive impact on the industry then, for sure. I wanted to ask maybe for 2 or 3 nuggets of wisdom, because you've been around, you've seen it all. Now you're consulting. What are the 2 or 3 things that you would want pieces of advice that you would want to pass along to global brands as they're thinking about going to China, going to Japan, maybe going to Korea? What are the most important, the things that you found over the years you have continuously had to repeat yourself on trying to drive a message home about how to do that properly?
Yeah, good question, Todd. I think the first important step is that your own internal organization has to have that global mindset from the C-suite through the rank and file. It can't be, it's those 2 guys over there that have the responsibility of us selling in Asia. Because if they don't have the support from the CEO and all the execs in the C-suite and the people throughout the organization, that's just not going to happen because there's so many things that need to be done from a operations standpoint, sourcing, product design, finance, planning and operations. If you're setting up a subsidiary with the help of HR, so it's to have that right mindset within your organization to begin with, because I've seen it time and time again. It's those 2 guys over there that has the responsibility, but nobody else wants to help them. So I think that's number 1. I think number 2, I think Americans like to make it very simple. Europe looks like this. So whether they're English or Italian, it's quote unquote European. And Asia looks like this, whether they're Singaporean, Thai, or Japanese, it looks like this. So it's very easy to do these broad strokes across that. But so it's like, then this next step is to understand, well, what is your competitive set? Who are your consumers? How are you going to be going to market in those specific countries? Because it's 3 different markets, 3 different histories, 3 different business cultures. You keep your brand DNA consistent, but then, how you go to market and engage with your customers and clients is going to be a different approach for each of those marketplaces. And I found the companies that try to cookie cut that make a lot of mistakes. And then I think the third point is making sure that you have the right people who are engaging in your international business. It's not even previously. There are companies today that the people that are responsible for the international markets also have responsibility for the domestic market. Todd, you're in charge of sales to Canadian Tire. So you're in charge of sales. Well, we'll just add China and France and Japan and Korea onto your plate as well, because you're in sales after all. Well, if you've never been to those places, how the hell are you going to know what to do? So it's like, well, why don't you? I think it's a very costly lesson to learn. So why don't you just go off and buy the talent and hire people who have been there and done that to that understand what you need to do internally to set yourself up for success, and then what needs to be done locally based on your strategy. Are you setting up a subsidiary, or are you just finding a licensee? I mean, but both have those pitfalls, and if you don't have the right people making those decisions, then then you're rolling the dice.
Absolutely. No, that's absolutely great, brilliant advice, Bill. I totally agree with everything you're saying. If people want to get more of that similar advice, where can they find you and how can they get in touch with you?
I'm on LinkedIn under William Tung, T-U-N-G. So I think that's probably the easiest way. I've got my contact details here. I'm based in Boston. And, with my consulting business, I'm working with partners around the world today. And we're doing exactly this, where we're helping brands, whether apparel or footwear, break into new markets around the world, from Russia to Argentina to China and all points in between.
Awesome. Okay. Last question. Anybody comes to mind that you think or would recommend that I talk to that the audience would love to hear from?
Sure. I got lots of fellow colleagues. My good buddy, John Ram, is the head of global sales at Champion Apparel. I think he'd be somebody who's very articulate, very bright to speak with. So Tim Boyle, the CEO of Columbia Sportswear, you want to get him. He's certainly somebody who would share his time. He's got his wealth of experience of Columbia Sportswear stories. So those are two just off the top of my head. I could go on and on. So
brilliant. Okay. Well, Bill, thank you so much for coming on the show. Obviously, we really, really appreciate your time. We appreciate your insights. And thank you very, very much for coming on the show and delivering them to me and to our audience.
Thanks, Todd. Appreciate it. Big honor. All the best.
Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market? Exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking across the pond for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope that you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands just like yours enter China. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co. And be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. 再见。